She sent him a text that morning. "Good morning, Cuddle Muffin. I love you." Those were the last words anyone ever received from Nona Dirksmeyer. By the time her boyfriend read that message and smiled at his phone, she was already dead. Russellville, Arkansas, December 15th, 2005. A Thursday. The air was cold, the kind of cold that settles into small towns and makes everything feel still. Russellville was one of those places where everybody knew everybody, where the pace of life was slow and the trust in neighbors ran deep. Nothing dangerous ever really happened here. That was the story people told themselves. That was the story that died on that Thursday afternoon, along with a 19-year-old girl who had done nothing except try to build a beautiful life out of a painful beginning. What happened inside apartment 12 at the Wood Springs apartment complex in Russellville, Arkansas on December 15th, seeing 2005 would shake an entire community to its foundation. It would launch 2 separate criminal investigations, produce 2 different suspects, result in 3 trials, and still, after nearly 20 years, end without a single conviction. 2 men were accused. 0 men were imprisoned for her death. And somewhere out there, right now, her killer may be walking free. But before we get to the killer, before we get to the courtrooms and the failed prosecutions and the shocking DNA evidence that changed everything, you need to understand who Nona Dirksmeyer actually was. Because she was not just a victim. She was not just a statistic. She was a girl who had already survived more pain than most people face in a lifetime. And she was on the edge of something extraordinary. Nona Carol Dirksmeyer grew up carrying a weight most children should never know. Her father was abusive. Not just physically, but in the worst possible ways a father can betray a child. She had to endure abuse from a father who was also a sexual abuser, a man whose shadow darkened her earliest years. He eventually died, but the damage he left behind did not die with him. Nona grew up in Dover, Arkansas, a small and quiet town, and then moved to Russellville with her mother, who worked tirelessly to give her daughter stability and love. Her mother was her anchor, and Nona, to her extraordinary credit, refused to let her past define her future. She found music. She became a soprano vocalist, training her voice until it soared. She performed at community events, filled churches and concert halls with something beautiful, something that could only have come from a person who understood what it felt like to need beauty in the world. At Arkansas Tech University in Russellville, she was studying music education. She wanted to become a teacher, so she wanted to take what music had given her and pass it on to children who might need it the way she had. She also entered pageants, not for vanity, but for purpose. The stage gave her a platform to speak about something close to her heart, child abuse awareness. She won the title of Miss Petite Jean Valley. She competed for Miss Arkansas in 2005. She mentored young girls through the Big Sisters organization. She was, by every account of everyone who knew her, the kind of person who made the world gentler just by being in it. And she had Kevin Jones. They had known each other since childhood, growing up in the same world, falling into love the way childhood friends sometimes do, slowly, naturally, like something that had always been waiting to happen. By 2005, Kevin was attending the University of Central Arkansas, about 90 minutes away. They were navigating distance. They were talking about marriage. They texted constantly, kept each other warm across the miles with words and plans and the ordinary sweetness of young love. On the evening of December 14th, 2005, Kevin came to Russellville. He visited Nona at her apartment, the one-bedroom apartment she kept at Wood Springs. They spent the evening together. He left around midnight. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. He drove away, not knowing that was the last time he would ever see her alive. The next morning, December 15th, Nona sent him that text. "Good morning, Cuddle Muffin. I love you." Kevin smiled at his phone. He texted back. He waited. When she didn't respond, he called. She didn't pick up. He called again. No answer. He kept calling throughout the day, each unanswered call adding a small note of unease to the back of his mind. By afternoon, the unease had become alarm. Kevin called his friend Ryan Eccles, who lived near the apartment complex, and asked him to check on Nona. Kevin himself drove toward Russellville. When Ryan arrived at the Wood Springs complex and walked around to the back of Nona's apartment, he found the sliding glass door unlocked. The security stick that should have been wedged in the track was not there. Ryan slid the door open and stepped inside. What he saw stopped the world. Nona Dirksmeyer was lying on her living room floor. She was naked, wearing only white socks. Beneath her head was a pool of blood so large it had spread across the floor like something poured. Ryan didn't go further. He didn't need to. He backed out of that apartment and called for help. Kevin Jones and his mother, Janine Jones, arrived shortly after. Police responded and sealed the area. What investigators found inside that small apartment was a scene of savage, concentrated violence. Nona had been struck in the face with what appeared to be an open-palm slap, hard enough to send her staggering. She had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and chest, so shallow wounds that suggested someone not fully committing to the knife, or someone who lost control and grabbed it out of impulse. Her hyoid bone, the small bone in the throat, was fractured, a sign of strangulation. And then, the killing blow. The base of her own floor lamp had been used to strike the back of her head. Russellville Police Chief Don Bacon would later describe it plainly. That single blow to the back of the head was the fatal blow. The apartment had not been robbed. Nothing appeared to be missing. There was no sign of forced entry through the front door, and on the kitchen counter, investigators found an empty condom wrapper. There was no evidence of sexual assault, but the wrapper sat there like a question that no one could yet answer. Detective Mark Frost of the Russellville Police Department was the lead investigator. This was the department's first major homicide case in years. They were not prepared for what was about to unfold. And here is where things go wrong. Here is where a case that should have led to justice began its long, agonizing unraveling. Police found something on the lamp base, a bloody handprint. It belonged to Kevin Jones. Now, if you think about it carefully for even a moment, the presence of Kevin's handprint on that lamp is not, by itself, evidence of murder. Kevin had just been at that apartment the night before. His prints were everywhere. And Kevin himself said that when he and Ryan arrived at the scene, he had picked up the lamp in a panic, desperate to do something, anything. But the Russellville Police Department did not think carefully. They did not follow all of the evidence. They looked at the handprint. They looked at the boyfriend who had been the last known person to see Nona alive, and they narrowed their focus. Kevin Jones was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. The The trial was moved from Russellville to Ozark, Arkansas, because the case had become so widely known in Pope County that finding an impartial jury there was considered impossible. Prosecutors built their case around the bloody handprint. They argued that Kevin had returned to the apartment after leaving at midnight, that something between them had turned violent, that he had beaten and stabbed the girl he claimed to love. The defense tore into the investigation. They pointed to the timeline. Kevin could not, they argued, have been present at the apartment during the estimated window of death, between 10:30 in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They pointed to the unconvincing nature of the handprint evidence. They pointed to what the police had failed to do, what they had failed to test, what they had overlooked or ignored. The jury deliberated. They came back. Not guilty. Kevin Jones walked out of that courtroom acquitted. Under the double jeopardy protection of the United States Constitution, he could never be tried for Nona's murder again. He was free, but Nona Dirksmeyer still had no justice. Her killer was still somewhere out there. If you've been watching along, we want to pause here and say, this story is not over. In fact, the most disturbing chapter is still ahead. If you believe that cold cases deserve answers and that victims deserve justice, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. So every view helps this story reach more people. And more people means more pressure. More pressure means there's still a chance for Nona's family to finally hear the words they have been waiting 20 years to hear. Now, a special prosecutor was appointed. The investigation was reopened with fresh eyes and a different mandate. And those fresh eyes looked at something the original investigators had largely set aside: the condom wrapper on the kitchen counter. Kevin Jones and Nona Dirksmeyer's family both commissioned private investigation into the case. A part-time police officer named Todd Steffi was brought in to do independent work. Steffi sent that condom wrapper to a lab for DNA testing. The results came back. The DNA on that condom wrapper did not belong to Kevin Jones. There was male DNA present, and it matched no one yet in the system. Steffi began cross-referencing. He began looking at who else had been in Nona's orbit, and who else lived in that apartment complex, who else might have had access or motive or opportunity. And then, through a separate and unrelated arrest, a man who lived in the same apartment complex as Nona Dirksmeyer found himself inside a police station, which meant, under routine procedure, his DNA was collected. The name was Gary Dunn. Gary Dunn and his wife had been living at the Wood Springs apartment complex in Russellville. His window was directly across from Nona's apartment. According to investigators from his unit, he could keep a 24-hour watch on her comings and goings if he chose to. And it turned out that Gary Dunn had a history, a violent, predatory, deeply disturbing history. In 2002, Gary Dunn had attacked a woman who was jogging on a trail in Russellville. He had beaten her with a large tree branch and told her he would kill her. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. He had served that time. And 4 months after being released from prison, 4 months, Nona Dirksmeyer was murdered. When Todd Steffi ran Gary Dunn's DNA against the sample from the condom wrapper, the results were a match. There was more. Steffi discovered that Gary Dunn's alibi, that he had been out shopping with his mother on December 15th, was wrong. The shopping trip had taken place on December 13th, not December 15th. His alibi had a 2-day gap, a 2-day gap that placed him with no verified whereabouts, seen at the apartment complex on the day Nona was killed. Gary Dunn was arrested and charged with capital murder in the death of Nona Dirksmeyer. What happened next is a story about how the American justice system can fail even when the evidence seems damning. Gary Dunn's attorneys went to work. They challenged the DNA evidence, arguing that the match to the condom wrapper was only a partial match, not a complete profile, which they contended was insufficient to convict a man of capital murder. They argued there was nothing else directly placing Dunn inside that apartment. No eyewitnesses, no fingerprints belonging to Dunn, no footprints, no fibers, no murder weapon tied to him. The condom wrapper, they said, could have been placed there in any number of ways. DNA is not a confession. DNA is not a conviction. They also did something else in that courtroom. They pointed the finger back at Kevin Jones. They argued in front of the jury that the real killer had already been identified, that Kevin Jones had done this, and that the prosecution of Gary Dunn was a misdirection. It was a calculated move. Defense attorneys are paid to create doubt, and they did. The first jury could not reach a verdict. Hung jury. Mistrial. Prosecutors tried again. The second trial went deeper into Gary Dunn's past. The jury heard about the 2002 attack on the jogging trail. They heard about the pattern of predatory behavior toward women. They heard about the DNA. They heard about the collapsed alibi. And still the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. Hung jury. Mistrial. A second time, a third trial was announced. Prosecutors said they would try again. A date was set. But the wheels of the justice system ground on and then stopped. The capital murder charge against Gary Dunn was dismissed. He was not tried a third time. After spending nearly 2 years in jail awaiting trial, Gary Dunn walked out of custody. For Nona's family, for the people of Russellville, for anyone following this case, that moment must have felt like the floor falling away beneath their feet. 2 suspects, 3 trials, 0 convictions, a 19-year-old girl beaten to death in her own living room, and nobody was going to answer for it. But the story of Gary Dunn does not end there. And what comes next is both deeply chilling and, in a strange and incomplete way, almost like justice trying to find a side door. See, 10 years passed after Gary Dunn's release. 10 years of the Dirksmeyer case sitting unsolved. 10 years of Nona's family living without answers, without closure, without the ability to say, this person did this, and they have been punished for it. 10 years of a community wondering if the man living nearby might be dangerous. On the evening of December 4th, 2018, the Russellville Police Department began receiving a series of calls within the same hour. Say a woman in the parking lot of First Baptist Church in Russellville reported that a man had tried to force her into a car. Before officers could locate the suspect, another call came in. A student at Arkansas Tech University reported a suspicious man approaching her. And then another call. A woman in a shopping center parking lot said a man had approached her aggressively. All within the same hour. All in Russellville. All describing the same man. The same vehicle. Captain David Ewing of the Russellville Police Department described the moment his team started connecting the dots. Right before we located him, it was starting to come together. We were starting to put the pieces together. They found Gary Dunn that night. He was arrested for attempted kidnapping and indecent exposure, and when officers searched his vehicle, they found something that made everyone's blood run cold. Ropes. and knives. He had been out of prison for 4 months when Nona was killed. He was out of prison for 4 months in 2018 before he went hunting again. One of the women he targeted that night in December 2018 was Riley Wagner, who would go on to become Miss Arkansas, USA 2022. She has since spoken publicly about what happened, about how her awareness of her surroundings allowed her to break free from the situation. "I just think I'm very lucky I got away from the situation," she said. "I think there could have been a very different outcome." She talked about the insomnia, the post-traumatic stress, the night sweats that followed. And she talked about the choice she made to turn that trauma into advocacy, to use her platform to help other women protect themselves. Gary Dunn was tried and convicted on the new charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted kidnapping, though he would only be required to serve a third of that sentence. He was sent to the Arkansas Department of Corrections Wrightsville unit in Wrightsville, Arkansas. So here is where things stand. Gary Dunn, the man whose DNA was found on a condom wrapper in Nona's kitchen, the man whose alibi did not hold up, the man who lived directly across from her apartment and could watch her every move, the man with a history of violent attacks on women, the man who went after multiple women 4 months after his release from prison, is currently incarcerated. Not for Nona's murder, never for Nona's murder, for a different crime in a different year, committed against a different woman. And Kevin Jones, the boyfriend who was arrested first, who had his name dragged through the headlines, who was acquitted by a jury after the investigators who built the case against him failed to properly examine all the evidence, filed a civil lawsuit. He sued the law enforcement officers he alleged had conspired against him, had targeted him unfairly, had built a case with tunnel vision instead of following all the evidence. The lawsuit moved through the federal court system for years. The defendants sought to have it dismissed. Judges refused. The case proceeded. Before we go any further, if this story has made you feel something, if it has made you angry or heartbroken or determined that victims deserve better, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think happened. Tell us what you think should happen. Nona Dirksmeyer's case is still officially open. The Russellville Police Department has never closed it. Her family has never stopped hoping. The voices of people who still care matter more than you might think. Now let's talk about what this case means, because it is not just a story about one girl in one apartment in one town. It is a story about how investigations go wrong. It is a story about how small-town police departments with limited homicide experience can make choices in the first 48 hours of a case that echo for decades. It is a story about how tunnel vision, locking on to the most obvious suspect, the grieving boyfriend, the person standing closest to the body, can corrupt an investigation before it has even properly begun. The Russellville Police Department had, according to accounts of the investigation, never handled a major homicide before Nona's case. Detective Mark Frost was the lead. He was doing his best. But best intentions do not substitute for experience, and the choices made in the immediate aftermath of Nona's discovery, focusing on Kevin Jones, not properly preserving and testing all evidence at the scene, failing to adequately follow up on the condom wrapper and what it might mean, set the entire investigation on a flawed track. There is a principle in forensic investigation. The first 48 hours are the most critical. Evidence degrades. Memories fade. Witnesses move on. Crime scenes get contaminated. Every hour that passes after a murder makes it harder to build an airtight case. And when those first 48 hours are spent building a case against the wrong person, the real killer has time to settle, to calm down, to cover tracks, to establish a version of reality that investigators will later struggle to dismantle. Gary Dunn was questioned in the initial investigation. He told investigators he had been shopping with his mother on December 15th. They accepted that. They moved on. They did not pull shopping receipts. They did not verify the date. They did not look closely at the man across the courtyard whose window faced directly into the life of a 19-year-old girl. They left him alone and went after Kevin Jones. The DNA on the condom wrapper sat untested. The bloodstains that did not belong to Kevin Jones sat unanalyzed. The evidence that could have pointed to another suspect lay dormant while a prosecution was built, crumbled, and fell apart in a courtroom. By the time a special prosecutor reopened the case, Gary Dunn had been living freely for years. The DNA finally matched. The alibi finally collapsed. But the evidence, while deeply suggestive, was not the kind of locked-down, multiple-source, ironclad package that capital murder prosecutions need to be. And so, two juries deadlocked, each one unable to agree, each one leaving the courtroom without the unanimous verdict that justice for Nona required. Dateline NBC later devoted significant attention to this case, including a podcast called Murder in Apartment 12, which described the investigation as a cautionary tale about what happens when public pressure and inexperience drive a homicide case. When the community expects an arrest, when media attention focuses on a suspect, when investigators feel the weight of expectation, they can move faster than the evidence warrants. And once they commit publicly to a theory, walking it back becomes almost impossible. Kevin Jones was that theory. He fit the profile of what people assumed: the boyfriend, the argument, the crime of passion. It is a familiar and seductive narrative. It is also, according to 12 members of a jury who deliberated on the actual evidence, wrong. But here is what keeps everyone who knows this case awake at night. If Kevin Jones did not kill Nona Dirksmeyer, and a jury said he did not, and if Gary Dunn was tried twice and the jury could not unanimously convict him, then who did? There are only a few possibilities. The first is that the jury made the right call both times, and Gary Dunn is genuinely not the killer, and Nona was murdered by someone the police never identified, never tested, never seriously considered. Someone who has been living with that secret for 20 years. The second is that the jury was wrong about Gary Dunn, that the evidence, while circumstantial, pointed clearly enough at a man whose entire history of violent predation toward women made him the only logical suspect, and that two hung juries were the product of a defense team skilled enough to create enough doubt in enough jurors' minds to prevent the 12 unanimous votes that justice required. The third possibility is the most complex and perhaps the most troubling. It is possible that both men contributed in some way to the events of that day, a theory that investigators and prosecutors have never officially confirmed, that remains speculation, but that the unusual nature of the injuries and the contested evidence has led some observers to entertain. What we know for certain is this. Nona Dirksmeyer woke up on December 15th, 2005 in her apartment in Russellville, Arkansas. She sent the person she loved a text message full of warmth and tenderness. She was 19 years old and had spent her whole life trying to turn pain into purpose, trying to build something beautiful out of the wreckage of an abusive childhood. She was 3 weeks away from her 20th birthday, and someone came into her apartment that day, whether through the unlocked sliding glass door or through the front door she herself opened, or some other way, and they committed an act of violence so extreme, so savage, that even experienced investigators struggled to process the scene. Her hyoid bone was fractured, she was strangled, she was slapped with enough force to suggest a confrontation that escalated rapidly. She was stabbed, and then she was struck in the back of the head with the base of her own lamp. The thing she had chosen, that had sat in her living room as part of her ordinary life. And that blow killed her. She was found by the people who loved her. She was mourned by an entire community. She was failed by an investigation that should have been better. And she has been waiting for nearly 20 years for someone to finally answer for what was done to her. Gary Dunn is currently incarcerated at the Wrightsville unit of the Arkansas Department of Correction. He is there not for Nona's murder, but for attempting to kidnap women in Russellville in 2018, 4 months after getting out of prison. The same pattern, the same hunting ground, the same town where Nona Dirksmeyer lived and died. His parole eligibility date has come and gone, whether he has been released or remains incarcerated at the time you are watching this. The charge that put him there is not the one that should define his legacy in this story. Kevin Jones was acquitted. His name was cleared by a jury. He sued law enforcement for what he alleged was a conspiracy to protect another suspect. The civil litigation moved through the federal courts for years. His life was torn apart by an accusation, a trial, and a verdict that restored his freedom, but could never fully restore what was taken from him. Nona's mother still lives with the absence of her daughter. The Big Sisters organization in Russellville still exists, still mentors young girls. Girls who will never know the mentor they lost. Arkansas Tech University still stands in Russellville, still holds its students, still sends them out into the world. The Wood Springs apartment complex still exists. Apartment 12 is just an apartment now, and the case, the murder of Nona Dirksmeyer, is still open. The Russellville Police Department has never closed it. It remains active. It remains, at least in theory, solvable. If you have made it this far in this video, you already know this story matters. You already know that Nona Dirksmeyer deserves more than a cold case file. She deserves a name and a story told to as many people as possible, because awareness keeps pressure alive, and pressure is sometimes the only thing that keeps old cases from disappearing entirely. Share this video, leave a comment, tell someone about Nona. Not because it will magically produce new evidence or force a prosecution, but because the alternative, forgetting, moving on, letting her story fade into the archive, is the only outcome that truly guarantees her killer never faces justice. She was 19 years old. She loved music. She mentored children. She wanted to become a teacher. She had survived a childhood that would have broken many people, and she had come out the other side with grace and purpose and love to give. On a cold December morning, she picked up her phone and typed, "Good morning, Cuddle Muffin," or "I love you." And then someone came through her door, and 20 years later we are still asking, who?